Cape Town, you meet the most interesting people. My city bus terminal, Adderley Street. I jump into the bus, and this woman, she hands me this letter. Now, let me be plain. I'm just an ordinary human being in my early 50s. I'm on the spectrum. Almost certainly have a debilitating dose of ADHD. I didn't know what this woman was doing. I figured it might be religiously inclined. Now, I'm not an atheist by the strict definition. I'm not agnostic. But I opened this thing because I wasn't getting on that bus, and I think she was a bit surprised that I was going to read this now in front of her. And here it said salvation prayer. I don't know if you can see that, but it was almost like I had to recite this to get on my knees or something. Lord Jesus Christ, I repent of my sins. Please forgive me. I believe them. Sorry, I believe that. Okay. And now, don't get me wrong, because I'm not anti the concept that there was this rebel rousing rabbi that walked the earth, probably a bit of a magician as well. Like, he walked the earth 2,000 years ago. Probably the life of parties that turning water into wine. He was apocalyptic, charismatic. And I think that Rome probably didn't like this guy very much. So I'm afraid with the Bible and who Jesus is, but it's not somebody that I'm going to get on my knees and talk to at this particular stage of my life. I did that before, and his father, and I used the different names that he has. I just don't believe that all these sacred texts written 1,600 years or longer that have been whittled down into what Martin Luther eventually got to 66 books. That was only like 1,500 AD, 1,600 AD in the 17th century. Why I think that all of that is true. I mean, I've long dismissed that, and I've been wanting to speak about this and to do more videos on this topic because I see how it influences people. So I look at this lady while I'm reading this. She's beautiful. She's got this olive skin. She looks a bit like Sade. Her hair's back in a ponytail. She's looked after herself, exercises a lot, and I think if she could sing jazz numbers, she probably appeared to me in my dream when I was younger. But anyway, and at the bottom of this letter is a whole lot of scriptures here. You can see they're psalms. You don't actually call them verses or chapters, for those of you that don't know. They're psalms. And Psalm 23 is along the list, and everybody knows, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so I echo some of these. Psalm 25, verse 4 says, show me your steps, Lord, teach me your paths. And these things started coming back to me. And then she had there Psalm 144. So she actually had one, Psalm 147 to 44, and I think she meant Psalm 144 to 147. And I said, those are all like praise Jah ones, or praise the Lord. Is that right? And then Psalm 105 at the end, and I said, isn't that the one written by young Hezekiah? And young King Hezekiah, in that verse somewhere, or in that chapter, there's a verse that says that your word is like a light to my roadway, or a light to my path. Anyway, and I was just talking to her about what I could remember, and she was quite impressed. And I asked her why she gave this to me. And she said, I was told to. And I looked around, and there was this there was a young man that was attending the bus in the far distance, and there was an elderly woman that was sitting next to her. And this woman, I'll talk about later, but I didn't think she gave her anything because she was pretty quiet at this stage. And so I realized what she was talking about is that Jesus or God. And I said, well, why do you want to give it to somebody that isn't saved? And she was quite surprised because I said, look, this prayer probably doesn't really mean anything. And this elderly Afrikaans woman sitting next to her was probably holding back from talking. And she was about to catch a train to finally get back to the farm. Her eyes went wide, and she proceeded to tell me this anecdotal story of a man somewhere in the state of America. She doesn't know what state, and she doesn't know what churches prayed for her. So far you can hear it's very scientific evidence. But she's telling me about the power of prayer, because this guy, even though he was an atheist in his heart, all this prayer from all these people somehow, and I waited politely for her to finish, and then I asked her, so what gave him the disease? and she didn't understand what I mean. There was minimal compute there. And she re-emphasized the fact that he was an atheist. And I said, are you saying that you get diseases if you don't believe in God? Only the bad get diseases, or the non-believers? No, that's not what she meant. Anyway, so I turned back to Sade and I asked her if she'd actually ever read the Bible other than these verses. I mean, the verses in Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, those are the good ones. You can quote them a bit like philosophy. But as she read the more difficult and more challenging ones, I mean, I shared with her that I've read this book about 4 times, and I've in fact studied it in quite a lot of depth, have the interlinear, but that's the reason I don't believe it. Why does she believe? Because she indicated that she hadn't really read these verses. And so I thought, okay, well, there must be a good reason why she believes if she hasn't read. And I mean, I think it's easier to believe when you haven't read. She tells me about how she used to be a stripper going out at night, and how she was obviously abusing alcohol, probably drugs too, but she didn't mention that during the evenings. And when she'd come home, she couldn't remember anything that happened that whole evening. She kind of switched off mentally. And so this was, I could see it was a psychological coping mechanism, and I wasn't going to interfere with something that was working, because sometimes we all need a higher power to get us over our addictions, our enslavement to things we might label as sin. And, you know, I'm not a monster. So instead back, I turned to this tannie, and I said in the West Afrikaans that this hypothetical man of hers probably would have got well anyway with the good medical care that he was getting, whether people prayed for him or not, because there's more people that pray for young children with leukemia and for things every day that don't make it, and it's simply called God's will, or it was his time, or he's off to a better place, he's gone to heaven. And so I'm sorry, miss, but granting you that prayer has any power would go against everything I believe in. I haven't experienced that in the 46 years that I was on my knees, and this little tannie nearly nut her panties. So, you know, what I try to explain to them, and I'm going to explain it to you now, because I realize sometimes you can't give somebody too much information, and especially if they're not ready for it. And so while I believe in this charismatic rabbi that really made an impact, especially in the Roman government, I think that one has to understand that he is not simultaneously also part of the Canaanite pantheon godhead, El, or Elohim, or El Shaddai, or El Ion, or all of these other names that were used as the concept of polytheism transitioned into monotheism. And so he simultaneously became one of El's 70 sons after that, which was Yahweh, and sometimes Yahu, Jehovah, Jehovah Jireh, Jah. These are all terms that were used for the gods at the time, and amalgamated by John into Jesus being divine. He was never divine before. This came through the churches and through theology. It's pretty much how myth works. In fact, it's exactly how myth works. Take Zeus, I mean, the Roman god. He didn't begin as a supreme deity of this Hellenistic imagination, because there were other gods and they were abandoned, and they eventually transitioned into Zeus along the way. Sabazios became Sabazius, and there were Egyptian god Ammon, and he became Zeus Ammon, and Etruscan Tinia, and then there was the Roman god Jupiter, the Phoenician god Baal Hadad, and then by the time Antiochus the fifth erected a statue in the Jerusalem temple, which the Maccabees talk about, that was a statue of Zeus Olympios. I'll talk about that in the next video a little bit as well, because this all helps us to understand the period. It helps us to understand when Daniel was written, when parts of Jeremiah were probably written, that Maccabean period, the first time that Israel actually became free for a period of time. And Hellenizing Jews, they referred to God as Baal Shaman, if I go back to the Zeus thing. So there was always this idea of one God, 3 names, 3 pantheons. It's just part of myth and part of history, and how religion has functioned through the centuries, is that some cultures absorb other cultures. Christianity has absorbed paganism into the belief structure, where you think most of Easter and Christmas come from. And so Yahwehism was a precursor to Judaism, and Judaism became Christianity. And this is our El, part of the pantheon of gods, included Baal or Baal, depending how you refer to him, the fertility god, and Asherah, who was Jehovah's wife or Yahweh's wife. And these were eventually absorbed into the religion and then disappeared, and this monotheistic God. And so it would have been a bit awkward to say that Yahweh was different to Jesus when the New Testament came about and when Christianity really took off. And so the myth had to happen that the Old Testament was referring to the same person, even though you see very different nature. And so the Trinity, I suppose, developed around this as well to explain aspects of it. But it's not anything unusual in Christianity. The local God of the conquered people would always become an aspect of the conquering God. The new God would inhabit the old God's powers, the old God's festivals and shrines, mythology, maybe rituals and images, things like that. And so worshippers wanted to experience continuity. You would want to absorb the conquered nation's people. And so for a few generations, people might have remembered, but then eventually no one remembers and no one cares. And the supreme deity that might have once been 2 or 3 deities, maybe even 10 deities, just becomes one. And for this reason, I think especially when you read certain verses in Deuteronomy that have been clearly written around the time when there was this pantheon of gods, even right in Genesis, right from the beginning, where Jesus is saying, "Let us make man in our image," and it's the gods, Elohim, that created things. It's a plural, and so I dismiss a lot of the Bible. I dismiss many of the passages about Jesus that retrofit him in an attempt to explain his lineage. Did he come from Bethlehem? Did he come from Galilee, Nazareth? And many of these are to try and fulfill prophecies that always fail. Not one prophecy about Jesus has really come true. And so I have skepticism around many aspects, like the whole birth narrative. There's supposedly this cohort of Zoroastrian astrologers that were unusually motivated to follow the star, to find this infant that was born of a virgin, which again was a mistranslation, in a manger, which was due to a Roman census that could have only happened like around 6 CE, so 3 or 4 years later. And this evidently led to the massacre of infants, which no contemporary history records show, to fulfill a prophecy, which, if you bother to read the verses around it, it's actually about a Syrian military leader with 7 shepherds and 8 chiefs, which don't seem to feature into the fulfillment of the prophecy in any way. And I mean, that's just Jesus' birth. And I don't want to give the resurrection a free pass either, because we also asked to accept an extremely extraordinary event here, someone returning from the dead. And the problem is that the gospel writer's testimony is just like totally inconsistent. They can't agree on whether he was buried in a tomb belonging to a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea, or a site that was very near where all the hangings were outside the temple, which is quite likely, or both. And then there's apologetics that explains it. And then when the woman arrived, and the tomb was empty, who arrived? The names of all the Gospels are different. Who did they see first? Was there angels there? Was the gardener? Who did they speak to first? The detail of the empty tomb. And then, Mark never had anything about the tomb to start with. And then we had this long version of Mark, which now suddenly included the resurrection. You think if it was so important, it would be there. And then Matthew 28, I think it is, or certainly near the end of Matthew, talks about the other tombs where other dead were resurrected, and apparently before Jesus as well. Now, apologists mention maybe with the earthquake, these bodies just were slowing out, and they don't use the term resurrected. But I don't want to get into all of the weeds at the moment. And then, there's a whole lot of scriptures that are retrofitted as prophecies, written after the time. And I will talk about that in the next video as well. But the point is, here I have this woman. She's approached me on the street and she's given me something out of sincerity. And I asked her, can I keep it? And I thought, in that moment, what I was going to do is I was going to make a video that's going to tell you why I don't think the Bible's inspired. And it's going to be a continuation of what I attempted to do on YouTube before. But just talking openly. And this lady, she was reciting her favorite verses like lyrics from a song. She hadn't read the whole Bible. She hadn't read the problem passages. Whether she would sit and watch a video like this or be the type of person to watch some of my videos, I don't know. But I feel like when you know so much, when you've had 46 years of studying the Bible deeply and then making that shift and seeing the passages in a different way, it's necessary to share that knowledge, not to just leave it behind. And so not only am I going to start this video channel, but I'm busy with a book called The Book God Breathed. If you like the concept of me telling my story and sharing some of this, then please support it. It's on Jaegur.com, and you'll be able to pledge some money towards the book. And it's not for nothing. I'll give you gifts as you pledge whatever amounts. But the point of the book is to share some really deep information, and there's so much I often don't know where to start. But there's texts like Deuteronomy 32 verse 8. The Masoretic text quietly altered that verse, and by the time that the prophets are writing, the merger of this text with El's titles and Yahweh's titles and El's personality and Yahweh's personality is all sort of merged. But when you read these type of verses, you can see that what I was talking about, what I've shared with you now in terms of the transition of God, and then what was once, as I say in Deuteronomy 32, spoken about as sons of God, were now referred to as angels, but it was really the 70 sons of El that was being spoken about there. And there's just really so much, and so with my ADHD, I might sometimes come across as a little bit incoherent, but I would love to hear from anybody. If you can comment on you, just tell me why you believe the Bible, because I'd love to engage with you on certain prophecies, certain things that you think are true. Send notes, and I'm also on Twitter at ShareTwits. That started as a financial handle and ended up that I'm engaging with a lot of people that only say things that are anti-atheist. I very rarely engage with a Christian that wants to share just his view on faith and so on. It's minding my own business. But when somebody attacks an atheist worldview, which is really minding his own business and not believing that there is a God, or at least in the proposition of a God, is not convinced that the 66 booklets that we call the Bible were inherent or breathed by God, you shouldn't attack them. I mean, this was my single belief that shaped my entire worldview, is that the Bible was inspired. For those 46 years that I was reading this, and I was just like this woman. I wasn't just handing out little tracts and pamphlets. I was speaking to people on the street. I was reading scriptures with them. I was trying to convince them, using the Bible, that they should change their life. They should also get on their knees, repent of their sins. I was quite an irritating person, to be quite honest. And I do get a bit irritated with Christians that do the same now. And I mean, but I understand that this was coming from a good place. That little Afrikaans woman sitting next to Sade said exactly that, as she means well, sir. Because maybe I was becoming a little bit aggressive in encouraging her to actually read that book that she's advocating, and to just think a little bit about what she needs. Because in my view, and it's not my opinion, but she was probably needed to talk to somebody. I'm not a big believer in therapy. When she told me she was a dancer, I was quite impressed, because I dance. I do conscious dance, and I strongly believe that we've lost this ability to dance with other humans. And I was hoping she was going to tell me that she does that kind of dancing, but she was talking about stripping, so I didn't quite relate, because I don't think I take my shirt off at the beach that often anymore, just for respect for those around me. At any rate, I had spent 46 years believing it was all true. I had subordinated my critical thinking to a worldview that classified independent thinking as worldly philosophy or thoughts of demons, sort of a binary. And so you kind of lose the ability to look at other things and other evidence. I was forbidden from looking outside of the Bible. So when I came to know that the evidence in the Bible wasn't true, I did so in a very interesting way. I didn't go looking for what we would call apostate material or atheist material. I was scared to go there. I looked at history. I looked at what Bible scholars were saying. I allowed myself to do that. I allowed myself to look at what the archaeological evidence was saying. And I tried to understand the prophecies in that context. And I was shocked by what I found. And this is what I want to share with you initially. Is not any funny business about having any hard atheist views. I just want to share with you how my faith in the Bible was slowly broken down by what I was finding out about how the Bible came to be, how it was written. I'm not even talking about highly paid individuals like Marcion and so on that's really had an influential part in putting the Bible together. That's all very interesting as well, but I'm talking about like Jeremiah 33, why it was written after the fact. We think it was a prophecy. I used to quote Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 2, and then when I realized that actually Daniel 9 was probably written in 167 or 165, around the Maccabean period, it was retrofitting of prophecy after the fact. So those are the things that I think are quite important, and what I'm fairly certain of is that the God of the Bible in particular, of whom I'm the most intimate and have the most painful knowledge, I feel that this God has failed to make a convincing case on his own behalf. And if you're a Christian with a genuine trust in the Bible, you presumably also care about truth, and so I'm hoping that you'll stay with me and watch a few more of my videos. You see, the Bible's central obsession and Jesus' central obsession, in fact, he prayed for it before Pilate. He said, be sanctified in truth. He said, your word is truth. So I'm referring to John 17. And he also declares himself the way, the truth, and the life. And so he said, in fact, before Pilate there, that his entire purpose, entire reason for being born is to bear witness to the truth. And so I think truth is important. Thomas Aquinas spoke about truth too. And truth is located in judgment, in that pause between having the facts, looking at reality, and making a decision. So truth seeking, I think, is something that's active. It's an intellectual process. You shouldn't just be believing something on faith. Even the Bible kind of advocates for getting to the source, getting to truth, testing to see. Again, it says to see if you're in the faith, but you should test all things. Don't be deceived. So this is just a very loose video just to get started. I've got to post something, and my feeling is that if you come with me on this journey, I'm going to try and be intellectually honest with you. The book that I'm busy writing as well is not going to be a theological textbook. I've deliberately avoided formal citations and footnotes and things like that. Initially, I started wanting to write that, but I want to make it just a story about people I meet, experiences that I had, how I deconstructed, in a sense, and my journey in terms of someone that would not look at false information, but looked at the sources, and then still reached conclusions, but understanding what words mean, going back to the interlinear, the Greek and Hebrew, comparing it with Strong, seeing the issues, reading Bible Hub, speaking to other ministers. I had 2 ordained ministers come and visit me and spend much time with me to try and help me with my doubts. And I'm going to tell you a bit about their experience in my book as well. And so please visit Jaegur.com, have a look at my books, and on that website you'll find the 2 previous books I wrote, Where Money Goes to Die and When Bankers Behaving Badly. You can sign up and get When Bankers Behaving Badly for absolute free. Do that now. And you're on my email list, and I'll send you other EPUBs and PDFs for free. All of the books I print are going to be limited in number because of the fact that the publishing industry just doesn't work. Almost 60 to 65% of books end up being pulp. And so I'm not prepared to kill trees. And so I think it's very important that we think a little bit about this. I'm not going to be sending books back to publishers for them to send it back to me 6 months later and have those books pulped. So the books that I release will only be 2,100. And there's a reason for that, just like Bitcoin is 2.1 million. 2,100 copies. There'll be signed copies. Every single person will be able to pay for my books in rands. So initially I'm targeting the South African audience, and those outside that are able to make a payment in rands. And otherwise email me if you would like to make a payment in some way. And hopefully what I'm doing is going to bear fruit. But I feel like this is a calling, and maybe this is the first of many videos. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.